Welcome to the Leadership Podcast, where our disagreements inform your decisions. I'm Dion Dixon, the resident Libertarian here, and I'm joined today by Democrats Thea Ali and Will Atkinson. Will Atkins. Sorry, it's
We've only been doing
late
this like
tonight.
50 episodes.
I know, seriously. Will Atkins. And Republican Brett Miller. Today, we're going to be discussing the president as commander-in-chief of our armed forces, and it has been quite a busy couple of weeks since we last recorded. We're playing catch-up here. We've got a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and dive in. Will, why don't you briefly cover the two major events that have happened involving our armed forces since the last time we spoke?
Sure. So it's been, a couple of weeks. We took Father's Day off, to spend time with our families and whatnot. And so in those kind of intervening couple of weeks, we have seen protests in California, and I'm sure that we'll talk about that word protest. Protests in California that the president ended up activating the National Guard and sending Marines to. And then we also saw the bombing of nuclear sites in Iran. So originally we were, we knew about the protests in California, and you saw things like, the governor of California, Gavin Newsome, saying, "Hey, we have it under control. We don't need any help." Conflicting information, perhaps, or conflicting conclusions made by the president that said, "You do not have it under control. Therefore, I am sending in these troops." So that was going to bring up a conversation about the use of the military on domestic soil and under what authorities and doing what roles. Are they simply guarding federal buildings, or are they patrolling the streets type things? And then later on, as we saw the bombings of Iran, then we're talking about, okay, what authorities does the president have to conduct those types of strikes? There's questions about whether or not Congress needed to be notified or consulted with ahead of time. Some of the linkages with Israel and the conflict that they had going on with Iran. So this was kind of us going to an ally's aid. So there's really a lot to unpack here, and we can start with the domestic side because that's kind of where chronologically where we were at. But there really is a lot to unpack here.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start, if we're going to start with the domestic side. So for our listeners that don't know, I live and work in Los Angeles, and I work downtown in LA. And so the Friday that I kind of arrived in LA, I was at work, and I work in one of the high rises. So on the 64th floor. So I remember looking out the window and there were all these helicopters, and I was like, oh, that's strange. But it's not like as strange as you would think, because not even like 2 months earlier, the SEIU, the big labor union, they had done a huge 10,000 person protest downtown, and there were helicopters, and I looked down and I saw all the people. So I was like, oh, so that particular Friday, at first I thought that's what was going on, because it was less people, though I want to emphasize it was less people than the labor protest that had happened like a couple months before. So I really didn't think anything of it until then. Of course, I left work, got home, looked at the news, saw what was going on. And since then, the national, so basically I think you have to be living under a rock, like you were saying, Will, the president deployed first National Guard members to downtown LA to quelch the violence. And then there eventually, from what I'm told, active duty Marines have also been deployed to LA. I have seen the folks that are located around the federal building, the detention area downtown, because it's only a few blocks away from where I work, and it's like right by where the courthouse is. So I've seen them. I haven't gone close to them, but they were there. I saw them when they first came when I first went back to work. And all I can say is it's just completely unnecessary. As far as someone who's lived in LA, let me start with, I'm from California. I was a kid during the riots. I remember when Governor Wilson at the time asked the National Guard to come in after the Rodney King verdict came in and LA had those riots. And I remember watching that on TV, and I remember being afraid. And then I lived in LA during the George Floyd, in the post George Floyd killings. And I remember being under curfew, seeing the riots that were happening in LA and the protests, and they were not all peaceful. But compared to those times, this is just, I hate to say it, it's like a typical LA protest. Like, it really wasn't anything that would like rank on anybody's meter as like, oh my God, LA is out of control. And on top of that, for our listeners, I think people know this, but LAPD, okay, first of all, the LA County has so many different police forces, it's not even funny, right? So you have Los Angeles PD, which is the city police. You have the county sheriffs. You have the highway patrol, which is significant because once the protesters go onto the highway, that's actually the highway patrol's jurisdiction, right? And then you have all the local police forces of the surrounding cities, because again, LA is made up of a bunch of little small towns, and so the idea that you would need to bring in, and we also have our state National Guard, right? So the governor has the ability to send in our state, military. But the idea that the president would need to get involved for what was going on here, I still can't wrap my head around it. And I do think I think the last thing I'll say is just a firsthand witness of seeing it. It reminded me of when we were I remember when I first joined the military and when I was at the academy, they talked about the Vietnam era and a lot of the folks when they came back, and you would have protesters protesting against military members in their uniform, and the public was against the military. And I never thought I would see that in my lifetime, where you have like the military standing against juxtaposed against the people and the will of the people. And that's what it's like. That's what it looked like, having the military folks just standing there by guarding this building arbitrarily. It just, and the irony, though, I'll say, is for the first time also you had people high-fiving LAPD, right? Because suddenly LAPD became the hometown heroes because they were like running, they were physically in between the protesters, because there's been subsequent protests, not in the last week or so, but right after the initial protests. So what was happening is you had LAPD actually forming a perimeter and keeping the protesters away from the military. And they were the ones that were trying to kind of maintain the peace, which is their role anyway. But typically, again, the protesters would be hostile to LAPD, and that's not been the vibe with ICE and everything. And then on top of that, with the military here, it's like suddenly it's like this united, sense of, well, at least LAPD, they're of LA, they're California, they live in our communities, and they don't want the military here any more than the protesters did. So it's a weird time, but I don't think it's good for the military. As a veteran, I don't want to see us be the face of like what is perceived as authoritarian government or is unpopular policies. Like, I don't want the military to be the image that carries that water. And I think that's what I saw, or what I've observed with the military being on the streets of LA. So
now, from a purely legal standpoint, I was trying to look into what gives the president the authority to do this. And I came across Title 10 of U.S. Code, particularly Section 332 and 333, 332 says this provision authorizes the president to call forces into federal service when, quote, unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impracticable to enforce federal laws in any state by ordinary judicial proceedings. And then 333 says it permits the president to use the militia or armed forces to suppress any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy if it hinders the execution of state or federal law, deprives a class of people of constitutional rights, et cetera, et cetera. So from a purely legal standpoint, it seems that President Trump has a leg to stand on. But Thea, you brought up the objections of Governor Newsome. And that was something, that I saw. Of course, I'm way on the other side of the country in Virginia, and I'm watching most of the coverage here tends to focus on what's going on in the White House. And, so I saw the back and forth between President Trump and Governor Newsome about, hey, we've got it. We don't need your help. Thank you very much. And then he sent it in anyways. So I want to turn it over to Brett to give us the Republican point of view. His point of view, I recognize, Brett, that you don't always fall directly into step with your party, and that's fine. From a Libertarian point of view, I just want to say, before I hand it over to him, that the use, like from a Libertarian standpoint, we really feel like the use of the military should be extremely judicious. Like you really should have an absolute need to call in the military, no matter what it's for, whether it is under these very narrowly defined situations on U.S. soil, or whether it's engaging in foreign conflicts, whatever it is. I think almost to a person, Libertarians would agree that we the United States just dramatically overuse our military for everything. It has become the do something button for our country. So let me toss it over to you, Brett.
Real quick before we go to Brett, on the Libertarian view, Dion, can I just ask real quick if the protests were about protesting ICE and deportations and detentions and things like that, if the Libertarians didn't agree with those particular rules and restrictions that are out there, would that be another reason why they would kind of support the protesters and not want the military to go in, because they want less laws to begin with? So sure, the people should be protesting these laws.
So I would say, one, there's probably a pretty even divide among the Libertarian Party about open borders. There are some on one extreme who say that borders and lines on maps just shouldn't even exist. It doesn't make any sense for the same way that for the most part, us Americans don't really notice or care when we cross state lines. It should be the same way for countries. I don't fall into that point of view. A lot of other libertarians, they look at the preservation of life, liberty, and property to sort of depend on having controllable borders so that you know who's coming in and out and what they're doing. But I think at the heart of every libertarian is, even though we may say that we want fewer laws on the books, we still believe fundamentally in the rule of law. And I think most libertarians would say, look, we may not like this law that's on the books right now. There are ways to get it changed that are within the law, and there are ways to protest that are within the law. So let's do all that we can to do that. There are very few libertarians who would justify breaking the law to then make a new law or get a law rescinded, right? It's kind of contradictory.
And I guess the other thing before we get to Brett, I agree with your take. I don't think it's necessarily completely reflective of where Democrats fall, because I think we're all over the map when it comes to how our use of the military and how we believe in it. But I agree with your take on the military. And I think a lot of that has to do with the times that I spent in foreign wars, right? I just think it should be, military force should be an absolute last resort. But I also think that, especially domestically, which is why our Posse comitatus is a thing, it really, really should be like, I don't know, people are starting the Capitol while, we're trying to have the peaceful transition of power. Perhaps that's a time to send in the military, but not with an average protest. That's why we have federalism, like we talked about in a previous episode. So to me, I think if state and local government have completely usurped their duties, and they're not able to respond so that federal law can be enforced, I can understand why those other statutes exist. But I think that really needs to be unequivocally what's happening. And here, that's just not where we were. And if anyone thinks that LAPD is not capable of responding to a crowd, that's just not, at least not in this instance, that was not the case. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that, Brett always talks about this, and I won't put words in his mouth, like locally, there's a history there of violence against, people and citizens in LA, right, at the hands of the police. So that all of these situations are very delicate. But I do think, like, I'll give LAPD credit. I saw them out there and they were trying to de-escalate. It's not that they weren't responding, but their instinct wasn't to pull out a gun and point it at protesters, right? And I think that that's something that is good, because you don't want people dying and that violence escalating. So, it is what it is. But over to you, Brett.
All right. Well, I'll kind of let our listeners know, for starters, I'm not terribly versed in this topic. I just got off vacation with my family, and so during that time frame, I was not overly interested in the news and keeping up with it. Yeah, I had some, high level hits that came through, but I was not doing any deep dives. I was spending time with my kids and wife on the beach. So, with that said, though, from what I had seen in regards to the protests, the Republican standpoint on things is that there's advocacy for deploying U.S. troops on domestic soil. It's rooted in a commitment around like national sovereignty, public safety, and crisis management, right? Like those are kind of the fundamentals that are there. And I believe personally, this was a very rushed incident. I don't fully know if there was justification to send in the Marines. Now, National Guard, there's a possibility that's there. But I mean, again, with that, Thea, you mentioned the PCA, right? In return to that, where even if we do have the military come in, they're in a support role. Like they can't actually enforce law from that standpoint. They're supposed to fulfill those other duties so that local law enforcement can actually do the law enforcement job. And I think we saw that. I didn't see, at least from the news reports I came across, I didn't see where the military was intervening at a level where they were doing law enforcement. They were just there in a support role. But it was definitely a significant show of force. I think there might be a little, political tat-a-tat between Governor Newsome and President Trump. A little bit of showmanship on both sides of it, right?
Let's call it what it is. It's a forgive my French, it's a swinging dick contest.
Oh, I was going to call it a pissing contest. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there's just a little bit of that's there too. And so, I don't know. I think here in the last few months, we've kind of seen some big egos get out of alignment and just, in multiple areas. We saw that between, Elon Musk and President Trump, and now we see it between President Trump and Gavin Newsom. And, to extend a little bit further, we're seeing that between the U.S. and Iran, right? It's everybody's just kind of flexing a little bit. So I think there has to be a little bit of political theater taken into account with some of this stuff. I will say, though, that really here this last week, I haven't heard much for any of the LA riots or the ICE protests. It seems like it just died off.
We're at war with Iran.
Well, no. So a couple of things. What's happening now is the military is escorting ICE on these raids. And so it's all over the local news here. And I, when you talk about, again, Posse comitatus, there's a show of force that I don't understand why it would be necessary. But
Thea,
I think LA. Mhm,
briefly for our viewers and listeners, can you
mhm.
just explain what Posse comitatus is so that they know what we're talking about?
It states that basically that the military is kind of like what Brett was saying, and this is my layperson's. I didn't look it up and review the language, but that the military is not here to enforce and be a we're not here to use force and exercise our, like our mission is not domestic, right? So the military is not here to occupy the streets of the United States, to use any type of, we're not here to basically be a police force, a military force domestically, right? So that our mission is overseas. That's why you have the FBI and all these other federal law enforcement agencies. They are supposed to operate domestically, but the military is not supposed to do that unless under very, like what you've outlined, narrow circumstances.
Yeah, and that has to be authorized by
yeah,
Congress to do that.
and it's supposed to be authorized by Congress, and that's because that's what separates us from a authoritarian state. And our military is scary. Again, I think most of us served overseas. When you're on the receiving end of us in all our gear, on the streets, enforcing whatever the mission is, that is a very intimidating sight. And so the idea is not, and our mission is not to protect and serve, right? And so that's another thing, I guess I think is worth saying. When I learned how to operate, so I was one of those people, the first time I learned how to shoot a gun was when I joined the military, right? And what did they teach us how to do? One to the head, two to the body. That's how they taught us to shoot in the military. It wasn't warning, non-lethal force. I've never shot a taser. I don't even know what that is, right? I mean, I know what it is, but as far as in the military, no one ever handed me anything other than they taught me unarmed combat, but we were trained completely differently, and so for that reason, that's why you don't say, okay, the people we taught, when you fire your weapon, you shoot to kill, right? I remember being told that, shoot to kill, you don't shoot to maim, right? And that's what you're going to put those people out on the streets of the United States to do what? You know what I mean? Whereas, for better or worse, police are trained in all these other things that military, for the most part, that's not our mission. And so I think the law and the separation between the military force and the police forces is with good reason and good cause. And it's so dangerous to to have the police out here, or to have the military out here in these law enforcement roles, because it's just, to me, it's a recipe for something really bad could happen and people could get hurt. And I think public will shift against the military very easily if that were to happen, because I don't know about you guys being out. When I got out, I didn't realize how few people know or have any ties to the military. But when I separated and I, went to law school and joined, started working in corporate America, there are people where I'm the only person they know that's ever been in the military. You know what I mean? They have no, it's just what they see on TV. So to that person, to see someone on the streets of the US with a weapon, if they were to use force against the citizens, they would turn on the military very quickly. And that kind of breaks my heart.
So to Thea's point, I want to bring up something that's related to that in terms of there's been a lot in the news about the law enforcement individuals wearing masks, but more so than that, that they wear military, you could say military style uniforms, but they're basically wearing ABUs. Like when law enforcement is essentially wearing the exact same uniform as the military, it is very easy for the citizenry to not know who it is. Is that the military that's doing those actions, or is that, DHS or ICE or whoever? And I do feel like that's an issue for us as the military, because we're supposed to stay apolitical. We're supposed to stay out of these things. And, Dion, to your point, yeah, this is a pissing match between Newsome and Trump. And the fact that Trump, as commander in chief, orders troops in there, and then they're getting, well, there's confusion over who's doing what. I think that's bad for the military, bad for the reputation of the military, even if they're not doing any of the domestic law enforcement activities.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that, I think it's important for us to talk about, I think we touched on it a little bit, but the role of the checks and balances when it comes to how, yes, the president is the commander in chief, but when you're talking about especially acts of war, maybe this is our transition into the bombing in Iran, that our system of government isn't designed for one person to singularly make all the decisions as far as how the military is implemented in these different situations, right? And so, again, I think we're all old enough to remember Iraq, right? I mean, I was at the academy when the whole WMDs was being discussed. I remember it vividly, when people started deploying to Iraq and all of that. And, it's funny because I was very critical of that at the time. And that I never thought it would be, at least I guess they tried to, we can talk about the intelligence failures, but at least there was an acknowledgement or some type of belief that, sorry, my dog is distracting me. I got a serious conversation
For the
with
listeners here, you don't have to explain what the dog is doing.
Oh my gosh, my dog is behaving so badly. But I guess I will give the Bush administration credit for at least thinking that it was necessary to build the case for war, right?
And even
not
more
just,
so, Thea, let's give Bush credit for going to Congress and requesting an authorization to use military force.
Yes.
So that is something, again, what is the law that I can't remember the name of the law now, the name of the act that requires that. The War Powers Act. Yep. Thank you. Yeah. So, in accordance with the law, he did what he's supposed to do. And he said, hey, Congress, this is what I want to do. May I have your authorization to do so? Now, the fact that we waged nearly 20 years of war based on a temporary authorization to use military force, that's a different thing. But at least he did what the law required of the president at the time. So I think we should give him credit for both Afghanistan and Iraq, by the way.
And that's the thing. I mean, he asked for authorization. He sent Colin Powell to the United Nations. I mean, intelligence failures aside, there was and I will give, I hate doing it. I will give the Trump administration some credit that maybe there was a sincere belief that there were WMDs that were coming any day now. But we thought that with Iraq, and we still were able to kind of do the things that we were supposed to do. And I don't see the circumstances being that different with Iran, that we didn't have the time, couldn't do X, Y, and Z ahead of time.
Especially because at first, Trump came out and said, Iran, you have 60 days to comply. On the 61st day was when Israel launched their strikes into Iran. And then Trump came out and said, I'm going to give them 2 weeks to come back to the table and negotiate. And then it was a couple days later that we sent in B-2 bombers. And so given all of that, sure, it could be like strategic posturing and deception so that we catch them on their back foot, whatnot. It still does seem like there was time at least to call an emergency meeting of Congress to debate this. So, Brett, you've been quiet for a while. What are your thoughts?
I mean, this is one of the things is, commander in chief, they kind of have the ability to do that on a limited basis, to order limited military strikes and raids. I mean, you've got, historical evidence of that with Reagan and the strikes on Libya, in regards to the terrorist bombings that were there. I mean, you've even got, President Obama that authorized the raid for Osama bin Laden, right? So you have these strategic strikes that can be authorized in this manner. I kind of see this as that. I mean, I think there's a credible enough threat. I mean, we've seen Iran move in a way that they are attempting to build up their nuclear war powers. This is just a very preemptive strike in that. Now, do I think that we were in an immediate danger? No. So I think there probably could have been a little bit more friendly banter between our branches of government to decide on this. Yeah, but at the same time, I don't know, if we have taken out their nuclear capability, I'm not opposed to it.
Well, I also want to bring up the nature of the airstrikes too. So again, for our viewers and listeners who maybe haven't been keeping up with the news, we sent in 3 B-2 bombers, which the B-2s are our most technologically advanced operational bombers. We have the B-21 coming soon, but right now they're the most technologically advanced stealth bombers. They are nuclear capable. We sent 3 of them with 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetration bombs. That is just magnitudes different from the strike package that went in to take out Osama bin Laden, for instance, right? So when we compare it to, what Reagan sent into Libya, even what Obama did in Libya and Syria, whatnot, right? I mean, we are just talking about a fundamentally different sort optically, right? Like you send your stealth nuclear bomber over a country. I mean, if the roles were reversed and somebody sent a stealth bomber our way, we would have to assume it was carrying nukes, and we would have to respond accordingly. And
Dion, the other piece of it is it's not that we just sent that large package. We did it in conjunction with an ally that was bombing and attacking multiple targets in Tehran and other parts of Iran. And so it was in conjunction with a larger act. And I think that at that point, it's not just a precision attack because it's not standalone. And so we're basically co-signing onto a larger mission that Israel was waging at the time, and that I do think we need to account for that.
And it is one, I mean, the fact now, I will agree with everyone that's like, look, the men and women who accomplished this mission, like shit hot, right? They did their mission very, very well, and we're all glad that everyone made it home safely. And that's, I mean, the fact that you can send your nuclear capable aircraft into and out of another country unscathed is a communication in and of itself that, like, we could do this again and it could be a lot worse. It's not a sub-based missile strike on one person.
Do you think that Trump and Hegseth were actually not just communicating to Iran, but maybe also communicating to China and Russia and North Korea as well with this, and saying, "Hey, look what we could do"?
I think unintentionally, sure. I don't think that they were
I would take China off that list. If I do not want us to get to drink our own Kool-Aid and think we could have done the same type of mission without a larger level of risk against a target like a Chinese target. So, I mean, I think if from a proxy standpoint, with maybe a message to China, but not from like a direct type of, they're a very different adversary. You know what I mean? And I just worry that the American people, I don't want us to think, I've always worried that we think too, that our military is invincible, and that makes us too willing to put our military in harm's way. And then what happens is you find the adversary that is able to kind of put up a fight, and now American lives are in danger or lost.
I'd agree with that.
So, Brett, going back to you, you gave reasonable justification using historical examples for the president's ability to launch a strike like this. Do you agree with it, or are you just saying it wasn't technically wrong? What is your personal stance on it?
My personal stance, Iran not having nuclear capability is okay in my book.
And I get that hindsight's 2020, because the reporting that's coming out now is, the trucks evacuated the materials before the strikes ever happened. The capability's only been delayed a couple of months. And in my mind, I mean, again, hindsight being 2020, we perhaps could not have known that ahead of time. But in my opinion, that makes it even worse that we did all of this as sketchy or shady or quickly or whatever as it was, and all we did was delay it a couple of months. If they ever do get to the point where they complete the enrichment and the weaponization, I mean, we just put an even bigger target on ourselves. I mean, they struck Al Udeid.
I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a bigger target. We've always been a big target. Like, it's.
I don't deny that. Yeah, I mean,
but we've provided justification. We've provided justification for a strike against us at this point, right? So I know, yes, Iran asked permission. Can I send some, missiles over to Al Udeid? But if they didn't do that, you know what I mean? If they decide to hit another target and not ask for permission, there's a level of justification they have based on our actions.
I mean, at that point, they just say it's self-defense, just like we would say if anyone had bombed us.
And
now I heard so I was listening to Dave Smith, who is a libertarian podcaster, and he said something pretty good that caught my attention, where he said, we've now given Iran actually all the incentive in the world to hurry up and get a nuclear bomb, because we have never launched strikes on nuclear capable countries to date, right? We've never done that. And anybody who doesn't have nukes at all, well, whatever, right? But if you almost have a nuke, we've already shown we're more than happy to go in there and keep plinking you, because you can't hit us back. So what we've done is, it's like, okay, well, we can't go to not having a nuke at all, because that doesn't put the fear in the heart of Americans. We have been afraid of engaging Iran in war at least for the past 20 years, if not longer, because of the threat of Iran becoming nuclear. But history has showed that we won't engage once they're nuclear. And so now we've just basically told them, now's your chance. Get a nuke right now, because we're coming for you. And if you don't get a nuke, we're going to wipe you off the map.
I don't know if it's just the dispute with Iran, though. I mean, there are, allegiances that they have with other countries as well. I mean, they've always kind of played friendly with Russia, and I think that's been a deterrent as well. But I mean, at least this time around, Russia kind of said, nope, it's not our fight.
Yeah. I mean, I think personally, from what I'm seeing, and okay, I guess one thing I need to say, we are at the time period of mission accomplished banner on an aircraft carrier, and Bush standing there talking about mission accomplished. That's where we are in this conflict as compared to like what we did with Iraq. And I say that only to say that history will there's information that the four of us have we can't even imagine yet about this conflict, right? And so we will look back at whatever we're saying today, and it will be altered by what will inevitably come out later. But that being said, the thing that I do think this was more about timing. And Brett, you make a good point about Russia. Russia is spread thin. with the conflict in Ukraine. And Israel has, decimated a lot of Iran's proxies. And so I do think this was much more about Iran being vulnerable in ways that they haven't been vulnerable in recent years, more so than it was about them being closer to getting a nuclear weapon now as opposed to any other time in recent history. That's my hot take. I may be wrong. You know what? Play this clip a year from now if I'm completely wrong. You know what I mean?
What do you guys think about the fact that Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence back in March, said that none of the intelligence indicated that Iran was actively pursuing weaponizing their uranium?
I struggle with that one because I spent the whole lead up to her nomination and confirmation saying that she's unqualified and a Russian asset and should never be DNI. And then I got to turn around and be like, you should really listen to the DNI. Like, she's got some good stuff to say. So I struggle with that just based on, I mean, I tend to agree with her, but I also still question her motives.
Well, are you questioning whether she was telling the truth as she understood it?
I don't know.
Yeah. I think my issue is that I don't know who to believe because I have such a low amount of trust and faith in this administration and anybody that's within it. So I agree. I don't, have warm and fuzzies about Tulsi, but I also don't understand why, if that's what she's being told as DNI and she's conveying that information, I don't have reason to believe that she would lie. You know what I mean? And that's not the intelligence that she's being provided and that she's trying to do the job that she was, appointed to do. And if that's true, it leads me to then question, are our decisions being made based on intelligence or vibes?
And as I have, obviously had conversations with friends and family and whatnot about particularly the Iran situation, what I struggle with the most is that the way that the events and the actions unfolded requires a certain amount of trust in the administration and in Trump. And previous actions and words and whatever does not lend itself to that trust for me towards this administration. So it's difficult for me to say, well, we, the four of us, will never know the inside intelligence that obviously the president had. And I understand when people are like, you should really, you should trust that the president has the best wishes of the country at heart and that he's following the intelligence and doing all the right things. And I would love to believe all of that. But I think the quote I gave someone the other day was, I don't trust this president as far as I could throw him based on previous actions and words. And that's can in and of itself be dangerous.
Well, without veering off too far on the topic of whether, we trust administrations or not, we are just kind of talking about the executive powers, whether our commander in chief has the ability to kind of do this stuff. So I just don't want to veer too far.
No,
but what I think it's relevant.
Technically, in most of these cases, yes, technically he could, but should he? And just like G.W. Bush, technically he could, but he still went and got additional authorities and presented evidence to build that trust, to build the support for the actions he was going to take. Technically, President Trump has the authority to do the things he did. But when you say, but should he, when a portion of the population doesn't trust him or doesn't support the actions he's taking, but he's, in my opinion, kind of drinking his own Kool-Aid in terms of like, well, this is going to work out fine. I'm just going to do it because I'm technically allowed to, and everything's going to work out great.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about trust, I think this applies to any president, right? when you talk about building a coalition and building out, making your case, like, I'm sitting here prepping for a trial right now, and I'm like, okay, what are the things that I need to present to the jury that they're going to want to know in order to understand how I'm getting to the conclusion that I'm trying to argue, that they should also reach the same conclusion, right? And there's a level of persuasion and, providing them information and bringing them along so that, I can see, hey, this is why, you should find X. And I think with this particular administration, I just am not seeing any effort to do that, including with Congress, right? So yes, you have making the case to the American people, but I do find it disturbing that so many senators on both sides and so many representatives on both sides of the aisle, when asked, are basically claiming that they were not briefed or they are not privy to this information. And again, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And if this were to come and become a full-scale war, like, we're assuming Iran's going to lay over and die, but we don't know that yet. And if things were to escalate, you do have another branch of government that I do think you should be including and having and trying to follow the process as it's written. And that the lack of doing that, that's for me where the lack of trust is coming, is why aren't you following these procedures? Why aren't you, even after the fact? Okay, so you made the decision to do the strike. You needed to do it timely. And I'm sorry, someone's at my door.
No, you're good.
You guys keep going.
And to play devil's advocate and defend Republicans a little bit, the argument has been, well, he couldn't go to Congress ahead of time because some Democrat would have leaked it, or even a Republican, whatever. Someone in Congress would have leaked it, so he couldn't go to Congress ahead of time. And in general, I buy that argument. Like, okay, yeah, maybe, things were as dangerous as they are, and it needed to be done quickly, and you could not let the word get out. I mean, we're going to overfly another country. So yeah. Why not brief them the next day? Bring everyone in.
But here's the one thing that I keep getting stuck on, and this goes back to my point about the magnitude of the strike and what we used to do it. So the Constitution explicitly gives the power to declare war to Congress. And I think that's for a number of reasons. And one of the big ones here is, Brett, we can say, and it would be technically true, that Trump authorized a very limited, I mean, it was a single mission strike package into Iran to do a very specific military objective, and then they flew out, right? And that was it. And so by those definitions, it is a limited airstrike, and he's within his power to do that. But a cabal of people, right? Congress would sit there, they would debate that, and eventually somebody would say, yes, but does that look like a declaration of war, given how we're doing it, what we're using to do it, et cetera, et cetera? Is it, just because I'm not saying I declare war, is it still in that act appearing to be a declaration of war? In which case, do we want to do this, right? And so I think even where the law gives some leeway for the commander-in-chief to do some of these things, I still think that fundamentally our founding fathers wanted to have sane and calm heads debate these sort of serious matters, so that you didn't just have one guy, whether he meant well or not, making a decision that could plunge our nation and now in these days the entire world into war.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, I think looking at the armaments used for this strike, I mean, we all have Air Force background. I mean, ask yourself the question, what other asset do we have that could have accomplished that mission? And there's not one, right? So when you talk about, do I use the big stick or the little stick? Well, only the big stick's going to get it done. There's nothing else that's capable of doing that.
But by virtue of saying that you're using the big stick, that's demonstrating that it is an act of war, right? Like, I think
yes and no, but you're also not using the full capability of that weapon either. I mean, if
Yeah,
you
but if
really
you
wanted to use that weapon, there would be a glass palace.
But it's like what Dion said earlier. If another country, let's make up Wakanda has B-2s and Wakanda flies over the United States and drops a 30-pound or 30,000-pound bomb, in Colorado Springs over NORAD. We're not just like, oh, well, that was a precision attack. We're like, we're at war. I mean, that's just how we would respond without question. We're at war. And so I think it's naive of us to think that us doing it to someone else, that's not an act of war. Now, how that other country can respond is another discussion. But I do think if we're having a good faith discussion, we committed an act of war on another country, and there is risk that comes with that.
I mean, I don't disagree that there's risk with the move for sure. But I do think, again, like to Will's point, there is so much information that we don't have and that we're just totally guessing at in terms of the information community that's out there. But
we're not guessing at the basic thing that we dropped, like what we did. You know what I mean? The details that motivated it, with what will be the second and third order effects of it. Maybe we don't have that information, but the basic information that we used our military ordinances to attack a sovereign nation, we did that. And it wasn't a small it wasn't a small, like I think to Dion's point, it wasn't, a small act. It was that's where I do think it's an act of war. And that's something that we don't know what the repercussions are going to be. And that's why that's where I feel like there should be more deliberation, and it shouldn't just be the whims of the president. And I had all the faith in President Obama, but I would like to believe if it had been him making that decision, I still would have had a problem with it.
So just to devil's advocate that, though, because that probably the biggest counter argument that I do struggle with a little bit is now, like, scope and scale aside, obviously the size of the attack and how it was conducted was different, but is it fundamentally different than what Obama did or any other president in terms of like missile strikes, counterterrorism against certain individuals?
I mean, you're removing a potential threat against the United States. Yes, the scope and scale is different, but I think the intent is the same.
And I guess the question is, the difference in scope and scale, does that make it fundamentally a different kind of entity entirely, or should this be considered the same as what Obama and everyone else did?
See, there's so many factors that play into that, though, because you're talking about, Osama bin Laden, who is an individual with an organization around him versus a country with a full government behind it.
Yes.
So again, the implications there are different, but that's also that the reason for the scope and scale is different because the scope and scale of your adversary is different.
But I think that's significant. You hit the nail on the head in that publicly Pakistan was not openly saying that they were supporting Osama bin Laden, right? The Pakistani government. Now we can say what was really going on behind the scenes, whatever, but on its face, the Pakistani government was not, Osama bin Laden was not an official. He was not there under some type of the official protection of Pakistan and whatnot. And so when we went, it almost gave more credibility to like J.D. Vance's comment that we're not at war with Iran, we're just at war with its nuclear facilities. In that instance, with the bin Laden strike, we were not attacking Pakistan, any of its government facilities. We were not attacking the country of Pakistan in any way, in the sovereign nation of Pakistan. But in this instance, we were going after, a center of gravity for Iran. You know what I mean? And so it was an attack on the country and its assets, and I do think that makes it a little bit different when we're talking about, I think we've spent so many years fighting the war on terror where you didn't have official states, that we were fighting an official government. And now here it is, and I mean that in terms of like the war in Afghanistan, right? We were never at war with the Afghan government, so to speak. But here, I think we committed an act against Iran, and against the Iranian government, Iran's government. And if they were officially to retaliate or continue to escalate, then we are at war with a country, not a terrorist, cell. Even Hamas, you can say Israel is not at war with Palestine right now; they're at war with Hamas. And there's not that distinction here.
So
Yeah,
one of the things
don't
that
disagree.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was also thinking about when I was thinking about the fact that we used the B2s is not just Iran and what they're thinking, right? Because they probably didn't actually see them coming at all. But we know that Russia and China and other countries have spy satellites, they have reconnaissance, they have all kinds of ways of keeping track. And because of a lot of START and SALT and all these other nuclear arms treaties that we're party to, they actually have the right and obligation to observe our nuclear assets. So they know where our nuclear bombers are and stuff. And so what was the Russian military or the Chinese military thinking while watching these B2s in transit, right? They don't know what they're carrying. And I guarantee you, like if our folks at NORAD or someplace else saw a whole bunch of Tu-160s or Tu-95s taken off from Russia and flying somewhere, that was not like announced to us, right? Like we kind of know, like Russia's like, hey, we're going to go overfly over here, and then we show up and we greet them with our F-15s and F-22s and stuff. But if they just all of a sudden were like just started flying someplace, we'd be like, the fuck is going on? Is this World War III? Everybody pucker, because we might be like lighting everything up.
Well, and who's to say that we didn't tell them?
Maybe we did, and that hopefully, to avoid World War III.
I doubt.
It's just one of those unknowns, right?
I don't think that's unknown because they're an ally of Iran. They're an ally of Iran. I doubt we called Iran's allies and said, "Oh, just by the way, we're coming." So I think what we know of military operations between the four of us, I sat in the chaos. I can't imagine that there's a call to Russia or China that we're about to go send B2s to bomb Iran.
Well, I mean, I guess it depends, right? I mean, again, it's all speculation. It's a whole other topic we could get into. But do either of those countries want Iran to have nuclear capability either?
I thought, so that brings up, you'd mentioned that earlier, and I struggled with it earlier. I thought Russia said that they were, because of this, they were going to help Iran by sending nuclear materials or something to them.
They did say that.
Yeah. So that was
they said they were going to give Iran nukes. Yeah.
Right. So I struggle with that when you say that, because it seems to me like Russia wants Iran to have nukes, as allies would.
So we're coming up on an hour here, and we're straying a little bit from the original premise of the episode, which is, what is the commander-in-chief's role when it comes to the military? So I think now we should probably wrap up and maybe just say on those two major events, the riots in Los Angeles and the bombing of Iran, had we been the commander-in-chief, would we have done things differently? And I'll go ahead and start, and I'll say on both of those instances, I would not have used the military. And I would have really tried to use more diplomacy, much like Trump said in a tweet that he sent. I think it was in 2015. He sent out a tweet that said that Obama's only threatening to bomb somebody because he can't negotiate with them. So I would have liked to see more negotiations. But what do you guys think?
In both cases, the president technically has the authority to do those things. Right. What I have seen from this president is abuse of power that he technically has. So it's while he has the authority to do it, how he does it, and all of the things that surround those powers, I think, are not being well used or used in a good way. So, yeah, I tend to agree. I would not have used the military the way that they were used in both of those instances.
So for California, absolutely, I disagree with how the military was deployed domestically, and I would not have done that. I wouldn't even have threatened it. And so I think fundamentally, as the commander in chief, I'll go a step further. I think that that the decision to send troops into our city streets in that way was a very dangerous one. And but for the grace of God, nobody got hurt, both from the military standpoint, because I just think of the Marine who uses his weapon stateside, because he or she is put in a situation that perhaps they weren't trained for. That harms them as much as it may harm the person on the other end of that weapon. So I disagree with that decision. And for Iran, I also would not have sent military force in at that time. I would have. I actually agreed. I know we didn't have a podcast, but I was like, oh, I hope, here it is. Trump's trying to use diplomacy. A week earlier, I believed what he was saying about trying to have the talks with Iran. I would have liked to have seen more of a deliberation. I would have liked to know that there was, that we didn't. I feel like our hand wasn't forced by another country, because I do think we didn't talk about that as much, but I do think that a lot of our hand was forced by Israel's attacks. And I don't like that instead of us having to make decisions, from my perspective, this commander in chief making a decision based on it being advised and making a decision within the branches of the United States government, it feels like perhaps there was a lot of influence from a foreign ally that led us to this decision. And so for those reasons, I would, if I were commander in chief for a day, I would have handled it differently, and I would not have deployed our military at that time. I'm not saying I wouldn't have done it in the future, but I don't think I would have done it in that way at that time.
So my take on it would be, for the protests in California, I think it was an overreach to send in the Marines. I don't necessarily know of, the federal extension of the National Guard. Maybe was necessary. I think it might have been an overreach there, but definitely when it got to the point of actually sending actual military personnel in the Marines, I think that was an overstep. I don't think that should have been done. Now, in terms of Iran, that's a tough one for me, because there is so much information there that I don't have and don't know to say whether I would do the same thing in the position of the commander in chief. I really don't know. It's not something I can comfortably say that yes, I would, or no, I wouldn't. There's a lot of stuff there that is just unknown. So I kind of have to abdicate on that one.
The only other thing I wanted to say, so in civil military relations, we talk a lot about, because the civilians are in charge, they have the right to be wrong, that they're in charge and they get to make the decisions, even if the military doesn't agree with it. And I'm sensitive to that fact in this case, because I'd be willing to bet that Hegseth was fully on board with going to Iran and sending the Marines into California. But, civilians are in charge of the military for a reason. And we like to say that the civilians have the right to be wrong, even if, they're wrong. Even if ultimately the decision ends up being a bad one, they are the ones that get to make that decision.
I mean, I agree with that, but I also think that's all the more reason where it needs to be a decision that is made with all of the consideration of the dangers of using the military. It's not your personal, grunt force to just use for intimidation factors and things like that.
All right. Well, this is the part of the podcast that I enjoy the most, where we get to talk about what's been making us happy this past week or couple of weeks. So since I'm going to close out today, I'll go last. Anybody want to go first?
Sure, I can step in first. So what's been making me happy is it's kind of a fun thing. It's the second time that I've gotten to do it. But this past weekend, I got to officiate a friend's wedding. And so I got the opportunity to join them in matrimony. It was just a lot of fun, to get up there and stand there and say, like, by the power vested in me, right? To throw that out there. But it was just a good time getting it's a young couple, young man that I mentor and his now bride. I got a chance to just spend the day with him and have fun and hang out. And I don't know, it's just neat to be asked to do that.
What advice did you give them as a new married couple?
I honestly, it's the advice I give any married couple, new or old. Learn to communicate. I always joke around with them like, your marriage needs to have a lot of this. Back and forth conversation. You have to dialogue with each other. It's one of the biggest things that I see with the mentoring that my wife and I do for business associates is there's always issues with communication. Most problems come from miscommunication. So with marriage, absolutely, you got to talk through stuff.
All right. So I was not a good student in school, and I failed like every math class I ever took. And I was on a ROTC scholarship for undergrad electrical engineering, and I had to retake all my math classes because if I didn't retake them and replace the D's and F's, my GPA was too low to keep my scholarship. And right now, my daughter is doing advanced math. So it's the summertime, right? She should be like doing nothing. She's taking next year's math class over the summer. So it's essentially like I'm homeschooling her in 7th grade math. And man, I am crushing it. She's got an A in that class, and I'm pulling out stuff from 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. Like, how long has it been? Just now, granted, we just finished the Pythagorean theorem unit. So, that one's pretty good. But yeah, just some of the rules and everything. Like, I'm really proud of myself. I'm proud of her. She's working super hard. She just finished essentially the first semester. So she got an A in her first semester. She's starting the second semester, and she's loving it, which is weird to me because I hate it. Hate math. But spending time with her and going through it and, seeing her kind of like she's loving the fact she got an A. So it's making me happy.
She's probably loving it because she's got a good teacher.
Yeah.
No, but all those memes, like kids crying and dads screaming at them about math, like that's all that's in my head all the time, because she'll do perfect Pythagorean theorem and then she'll be like 2 + 2 is 5. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, but I have to like, don't make her cry. Don't make her cry. And actually it's only when mom helps her with math that she cries. Just saying.
So it's officially summer, and I think what's making me happy is Dodger baseball. So I went to the Dodger game last Thursday. It was Juneteenth. So they had like a Black Heritage themed game. Like the Dodgers have tons of like themed games, but we went to this one. So we all got like a Mookie Betts jersey that came with our ticket. I took the kids. I went with my cousin and her boyfriend, they're also really big baseball fans. And it was like so much fun. And it was my first time taking Theo to a baseball game. He's 7, and he was like so into it and like screaming like "Go Dodgers!" and like he was so like he was dancing every time the music came on. And this was the game where the managers got into the fight and everybody came out on the field and all that. We were playing the Padres. But it's just been a lot of fun to be a Dodger fan. I mean, yeah, we're the reigning World Series champions. I mean, it's just so cool, and Ohtani is so cool, and it's just like it's like a really good team right now. And so and Ohtani's huge in person. I knew he's like 6'4". I didn't realize it until I went to the game and we were like behind home plate, and I was like, this man is large, right? And when he got hit with the ball, I'm like, that would have like taken me out, but he like took it like a champ. And so anyway, yeah, Dodger baseball is what is making me happy. I'm hoping that we maintain and finish out the season strong. We won today, but yeah, Dodger baseball. That's what's making me happy. And then my son is now a fan.
And Thea, I was surprised
Nice.
when you were earlier in the podcast, when you were talking about the size and scope of the LA protests and everything. one of the common things has been like when the Dodgers won the World Series, there was far more people and chaos and destruction and
yeah.
But there was no troops called in for that one.
Nope, that's true. I didn't go to that, but yeah, I saw the footage. Yeah, lots and lots of crazy people on the streets. Yeah, so.
All right. Well, for me, so I got to have a date night with my lovely bride, and we went. So the event was we went to see the comedian Henry Cho. He was out at the Lincoln Theater in downtown DC. And for those of you who don't know who Henry Cho is, go look him up. He's great. He's got a couple of specials on Netflix and whatnot. He is full blood Korean. His mom and dad are both Koreans, immigrated to the United States. They settled in Nashville, Tennessee, or Knoxville. I don't, somewhere in Tennessee. Knoxville, I think. And so he was born and raised in Tennessee, and he definitely speaks like a Tennessean. And so for most people, like, you know, for the longest time in his stand-up, he would start off his show with like, you guys are all looking at me weird because I sound like this, but I look like this. Just he's an outstanding comic. Love all of his stuff. It's very clean comedy. We had a great time, but I think, you know, the show was excellent. I don't want to downplay the show, but probably the best part of it was beforehand we went to dinner, and we went to a place called Busboys and Poets, and it's named for Langston Hughes. And a great place. The food was excellent. It's like a bookstore, coffee shop, bar, restaurant, like all combined in one. And you know, I actually met and then subsequently proposed to my wife in a similar place that was like a used bookstore with a coffee shop and a bar and stuff. So it was very apropos for us. The food was excellent. The prices were reasonable considering that we were in DC. And like we had dessert, we had cocktails. It was great, right? It was great to be out, to enjoy being adults without a kid constantly trying to get our attention, and then to go see a great show. Just a wonderful time. So that's what was making me happy. All right. So that's it for our show today. Let us know, viewers and listeners, let us know what you think about the commander-in-chief and his ability to call in the troops, whether it be here in the United States or overseas. Drop a comment. Let us know what you think about those two instances, the riots in Los Angeles and the attacks on Iran. Also, like and subscribe. Share us with your friends and family. If you're enjoying us, please get the word out. Help everybody else to hone in on this and to enjoy what we're doing here. And with that, we'll be back at you next week with another fun topic. Bye, everybody.